The Window That Watches. Part 1. Evan had been thrilled to move into the apartment, a steal for the price, tucked at the edge of the city where the streets grew quiet and the buildings leaned into the shadows. It was small but cozy, with creaky floors and a single, wide window in the living room that overlooked the alley below. He'd noticed it the first day. The glass didn't reflect the streetlights or the brick wall opposite. It showed a dim, unfamiliar room, its edges blurred, its depths stark. He figured it was a trick of the light, some odd angle, and shrugged it off. Hanging curtains he rarely closed. The place felt like home, or so he told himself. That night, as he unpacked, he caught at a flicker in the window. Not the alley, not his reflection, but a shadow, vague and tall, shifting in that strange room. He blinked, and it was gone, the glass showing only darkness beyond the curtains. He rubbed his eyes, chalking it up to exhaustion, the long move wearing him thin. But a chill lingered, prickling his neck, and he avoided the window as he went to bed, the quiet of the apartment heavier than it should have been. Sleep brought no rest. He dreamed of standing before the window, staring into that room, empty but alive, its walls pulsing faintly, shadows swaying at the edges. A whisper slipped through the glass, soft and low. Evan. He jolted awake, the clock reading to 47 a.m., his breath fogging in the cold. The window glowed faintly, a pale shimmer that shouldn't have been there, and the whisper came again, not a dream, but real, threading through the silence. Evan, you're here. He stumbled to the living room, heart pounding, and saw it. The glass reflected not him, but that room, darker now, with a shadow standing still, its head tilted, watching. The next day, he couldn't shake it. The window looked normal in sunlight, alley, bricks, nothing odd, but the whisper stuck in his mind, a hum that followed him through breakfast, through work, through the streets. By evening, he stood before it again, curtains open, the glass reflecting that room once more, dim, endless, wrong. The shadow was there, closer, its form sharper, mimicking his stance but not his face. He waved, and it waved back, slow, deliberate, a second too late. His stomach dropped, but he couldn't look away. The whisper louder now. Evan, see me. The room in the glass pulsed, its walls breathing, the shadow tilting its head as if listening. Curiosity gnawed at him. He asked the landlord about the place, casual, offhand, but the old man's face tightened. Last guy left in a hurry, he muttered. Said the window watched him. Crazy talk. Evan pressed, and the landlord shrugged, handing him a crumpled note found in the trash. Don't look too long. It knows you're there. The handwriting was jagged, the paper stained, and Evan's chest tightened as he read it, the whisper echoing in his ears. Evan, you're here. He shoved it in his pocket, telling himself it was nonsense. But the window loomed larger when he got home, its glass darker, its glow colder. That night, the whisper turned to words, soft, insistent, threading through the hum. Evan, come closer. He avoided the living room, staying in bed, but the sound followed, seeping from the walls, the ceiling, the air itself. Sleep came unbidden, and he stood before the window again. The room, sharper walls slick with shadow, the figure clearer, its head tilted, its form human but wrong. It raised a hand, beckoning, and the whisper grew. Evan, look at me. He woke, gasping, the clock stuck at 2:47 a.m., the window glowing brighter, the shadow closer, its outline brushing the edges of the glass, its gaze a weight he couldn't see, but felt. The apartment felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the window watched him from every angle. He tried closing the curtains, but the glow pierced through, a pulse that synced with his heartbeat, tugging at his mind. The next evening, the shadow was bolder, standing inches from the glass, mimicking his every move, its delay shorter, its form taller, thinner, faceless. The whisper swelled. Evan, you're mine. He turned away, but the room reflected. In every mirror, every screen, the same dark space, the same shadow, watching, waiting. The landlord's note burned in his pocket, the words a warning he couldn't unhear. It knows you're there. Sleep eluded him, the hum louder, the whisper a chant. Evan, see me. He dreamed, or didn't, of the figure stepping closer, its hand pressing the glass, its form flickering like static, its head tilting as if it knew him. He woke to the glow, the clock frozen, the shadow nearer, its outline sharp against the window, its presence a cold that sank into his skin. The apartment trembled, the hum, a low roar, the whisper a demand. Evan, look at me. He didn't want to, didn't dare, but his feet moved anyway, drawn to the window. the glass pulsing, the room alive, the shadow waiting still, silent, watching. The night stretched on, the windows glow bending the light, twisting it into a shimmer that pulsed with the hum. The shadow stood inches from him on his side now, not the other mimicking his breath, its form a glitch in the dark, its whisper a thread in his mind. Evan, you're here. He tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed, the hum spiking, the shadow tilting closer, its presence a weight that crushed his chest. The apartment wasn't his anymore, it belonged to the window, to the room beyond, too. The thing that watched, and he was its captive, trapped by a gaze he couldn't escape, a whisper he couldn't silence. Part to Evan's apartment had become a cage under the window's relentless gaze, its glass a portal to a terror that gnawed at his every breath. The hum wasn't just sound anymore, it was a presence, a low drone that pulls through the walls, the floor, his skull a vibration that sank into his bones, his chest, his soul. The clock hadn't moved past 2:47 a.m. since he last dared to look, its digits flickering like a dying flame, a cruel mockery of time that no longer held. The window glowed brighter, its light cold and piercing, casting a shimmer that twisted the room into something alive, something watching. The whisper wove through it, threading his name into the silence. Evan, look at me. Sleep was a forgotten refuge, replaced by a haze where the hum ruled. He'd tried to avoid the window, closed the curtains, turned it to the wall, but the glow pierced through, its pulse sharper, a rhythm that shook his nerves. The shadow stood closer now, its form stark against the glass, tall, thin, faceless, mimicking his every move with a delay that shrank each night, its outline a glitch in the dark. It didn't speak, didn't touch, but its presence was a weight, a cold that pressed against his lungs, whispering his name beneath the hum. Evan, you're here. The room in the glass grew clearer, walls slick with shadow, corners bending inward, alive with a pulse he couldn't see but felt. The whisper turned to words, soft, relentless, threading through the drone. Evan, come closer. He stayed in his bedroom, lights on, door shut, but the sound followed, seeping from the ceiling, the walls, his own breath. Sleep came unbidden, dragging him under, and he stood before the window again. The room sharper, its walls breathing, its shadows swaying, the figure nearer, its hand pressed to the glass, its form flickering like static. The whisper swelled. Evan, see me. He woke gasping, the clock still at 2:47 a.m., the glow blinding, the shadow inches from the glass, its outline brushing his reflection, its gaze a shiver that sank into his skin. The apartment trembled, the hum a roar that shook his core, the whisper a chant. Evan, look at me. He tried to leave, grabbed his keys, yanked the door, but it wouldn't budge, the knob cold and unyielding, humming faintly under his touch. The windows in every room reflected the same, not the alley, not the sky, but that dark room, the shadow standing still, tilting its head, watching. He covered the mirrors, turned off the screens, but the reflection followed on the fridge. In his phone, in the glint of a spoon, the same figure, the same room, the same whispers. Evan, you're mine. He dug through the apartment, hands shaking, searching for answers. The landlord's note lay crumpled in a drawer. Don't look too long, it knows you're there. Beneath it, a faded lease, Thomas Wren, the last tenant, gone 3 years ago, his scrawl on a scrap. It's in the glass. I'm still here. Evan's blood ran cold. The window wasn't just a quirk. It was a trap, a vault for something that wouldn't let go. The hum spiked, a scream that clawed at his ears, the whisper breaking through. Evan, come with me. He felt it, a plea beneath the drone, faint, human. Help me. Thomas, lost in the glass, his voice a ghost in the glow. The shadow grew bolder that night, standing not beyond the glass, but within it, on his side, inches from him, mimicking his breath, its form sharper, its delay gone. The whisper roared. Evan, you're here. He stumbled back, crashing into the couch, but the room pulsed, the glow bending the light, twisting it into a shimmer that synced with the hum. The shadow tilted closer, its form human yet wrong, too tall, too thin, too empty, its head twitching, its presence a cold that burned without heat. The apartment darkened, not from night, but from the window's glow devouring it, a void that pressed against his chest, his mind, his soul. Sleep swallowed him, or didn't? He stood in the room beyond, the walls slick and cold, the air thick with whispers. The figure stood before him, its hand reaching, its form flickering, arms too long, head tilting too far, its whisper a demand. Evan, see me. He woke to the hum, the clock frozen, the shadow closer, its outline brushing his arm, its cold sinking into his marrow. The glow seared brighter, reflecting not him but the room endless, alive, the figure standing still, watching with an eyeless gaze that bore into his core. The whisper turned to a chant. Evan, you're mine. The apartment was alive with it, the hum pulsed in the pipes, the walls, the air a drone that wouldn't rest. He tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed, the hum spiking, the shadow leaning closer, its form a glitch that filled the room. The glow burned into his eyes, and he saw not himself but it standing where he stood, breathing where he breathed, whispering where he was silent. The shadow's hand brushed the air cold, electric, tugging, and the room trembled. The hum a storm. Evan, come with me. He didn't move, didn't dare, but his reflection did, tilting its head, stepping closer, singing his name in a voice that wasn't his. The night stretched on, the windows glow, a roar that drowned his thoughts. The shadow, inches from him, within him, its form a mass that pulsed with the hum, its whisper a noose tightening with every breath. Evan, you're here. He sank to the floor, hands trembling, the glow searing his vision, the room alive with shadows, dozens. Now, swaying, watching, waiting. The hum was his heartbeat, the whisper his pulse, the shadow his mirror. He didn't know where he ended and it began. The apartment stilled, the glow a low pulse, the figure standing over him, its form a glitch in the dark, its whisper a promise. Evan, look at me. The room darkened, the hum a thread in the silence, the shadow closer, its hand hovering, cold, relentless, alive. He didn't remember sleeping, didn't remember waking, but the glow knew, threading his name through the drone, pulling him deeper. The shadow stood within him, its form a flicker in his vision, its whisper a chant he couldn't silence. Evan, you're mine. The window pulsed one final time, the room beyond a void that swallowed the light, the figure watching, waiting, claiming a gaze he couldn't escape, a whisper he couldn't stop. Part 3. Evan's reality had crumbled beneath the window's unyielding stare, its glass a maw that devoured his every shred of self. The hum wasn't just a sound, it was a force, a relentless drone that pulls through the walls, the air, his skull a vibration that clawed into his mind, his bones, his soul, erasing all traces of who he'd been. The clock flickered at 2:47 a.m., its digits trembling like a heartbeat on the edge of death, a cruel anchor in a world that no longer existed. The window glowed brighter, its light not warm but cold, piercing, a shimmer that twisted the apartment into a void alive with intent, its whisper threading his name through the dark. Evan, you're mine. Sleep was a lost dream. The line between waking and nightmare had shattered under the window's haunting vigil. He hadn't slept, or had he? But the hum didn't care, dragging him under with its rhythm, its pulse a chain that bound his every breath. The shadow wasn't a shadow anymore, it was the room, the glow, the air, its form stark against the glass, tall, thin, faceless, mimicking his every move with no delay, its outline a glitch that filled the space. It didn't speak, didn't touch, but its presence was a cold weight, a static chill that pressed against his chest, chanting his name beneath the drone. Evan, look at me. The whisper grew sharper, its words a blade that cut into his will, his sanity, his self. Evan, come closer. He'd tried to fight, block the window with boards, turned off the lights, but the glow pierced through, its hum louder, a pulse that shook his marrow. The shadow stood within him now, not beyond the glass, but here, its form human yet grotesquely wrong, its limbs stretching too long, its head tilting too far, its silence a scream beneath the hum. He clawed at the walls, desperate for escape, but they pulsed back soft, alive, humming his name. Evan, you're here. The apartment trembled, the hum a storm that shook the void, the whisper a vow. Evan, see me. The glow bent the light, twisting it into a shimmer that pulsed with the rhythm, casting the shadow in stark relief. Dozens now, swaying in every corner, their hands brushing the air, their forms endless. He stumbled to the door, pounding the wood, but it sang back soft, droning, a hum that joined the chorus. The windows in every room reflected the same, not the world outside, but that room, the shadow standing still, tilting its head, watching with an eyeless gaze that bore into his soul. Sleep crashed over him, or didn't? He stood in the room beyond, the walls slick with shadow, the air thick with whispers. The figure stood before him, its hand reaching, its form flickering, arms stretching into spectral threads, head twitching, its whisper a demand. Evan, come with me. He woke gasping, or didn't? The clock frozen, the shadow closer, its outline brushing his skin, its cold sinking into his marrow. The glow seared brighter, reflecting not him but them hundreds of figures swaying in the glass, their forms mirrored, their whispers a chant. Evan, you're mine. The house was alive with it, the hum pulsed in the pipes, the floors, the air a drone that wouldn't rest, wouldn't fade, wouldn't let go. He tried to scream, but his voice was theirs, a hum in their rhythm, a whisper in their chorus. Evan, stay. The shadow stood over him, its form a mask that pulsed with the glow, its hands brushing his hair, his face cold, electric, pulling him deeper. The window glowed, its light a roar that tore through his core. Evan, look at me. He didn't remember moving, didn't remember standing, but his reflection did, tilting its head, stepping closer, whispering his name in a voice that wasn't his. The glow turned unbearable, casting a light that didn't illuminate but froze, its hum a scream that drowned his thoughts. The shadow stood within him, beside him, around him, its form stark, its head twitching, its presence a cold that burned his nerves. The room trembled, the whisper a tempest. Evan, you're here. He saw them, not reflections but lives endless, loops of despair, a man staring at the glass, a woman reaching for nothing, shadows swaying in a room that wasn't there. Each one whispered his name, a plea, a claim, pulling him into their abyss. The apartment darkened, the hum a roar that devoured sound, hope, existence itself. The shadow merged with the glow, a towering mass that pulsed with the rhythm, its edges brushing his skin, its weight crushing his spirit. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The hum held him, rooted him, alive with a pulse that wasn't his. The glow burned into his eyes, and he saw not himself but them, his form flickering, breaking, dissolving into the glass, his breath humming their tune. The shadow's hand brushed his face, cold, relentless, alive, the hum spiking. The whisper a noose. Evan, come with me. Sleep came or never left. He stood in the void, the figures surrounding him, their hands on his arms, his neck, their rhythm his prison. The hum roared from his chest, his lungs, his soul, a drone that erased him, rewrote him, claimed him. He woke or didn't, the clock unmoving, the shadow within him, its form a glitch in his vision, its whisper a chant he couldn't silence. Evan, you're mine. The glow pulsed one final time, the room beyond a void that swallowed his mind, the figures watching, waiting, claiming a gaze he couldn't escape, a whisper he couldn't stop. The room stilled, the hum a low pulse, the shadow swaying, watching, waiting. He didn't know if he stood or sank, didn't know if he breathed or hummed, but the glow knew, threading his name through the drone, stitching him into its eternity. The shadow stood over him, around him, within him, its hands hovering, cold, electric, eternal, its rhythm a pulse he couldn't break. The apartment was no longer his, it belonged to the window, to the room beyond, to the thing that watched, and he was its captive, trapped in a gaze that wouldn't fade, a hum that wouldn't end. The window pulsed, the glow a whisper on the air. Evan, and then silence, a silence that wasn't empty but alive, waiting, watching. He didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't need to, because he wasn't Evan anymore. He was theirs, a flicker in the glass, a hum in the dark, a soul staring back from a window that watched an endless vigil he couldn't escape, a whisper he couldn't silence. Part 4. Evan's existence had been obliterated by the window's insatiable gaze, its glass a void that swallowed his every fragment of self. The hum wasn't a sound anymore, it was him, a ceaseless roar that pulls through his veins, his bones, his soul a vibration so deep it erased all traces of who he'd once been. The clock flickered faintly at 2:47 a.m., its digits a dying pulse in a reality that had long since collapsed, a cruel echo of a time he couldn't reclaim. The window glowed with a light that wasn't light, cold, piercing, alive, casting a shimmer that devoured the apartment, twisting it into a prison of shadows and whispers, threading his name through the dark. Evan, you're mine. Sleep and waking had fused into a single, endless nightmare where the hum reigned supreme. He didn't know if he stood or fell, didn't know if he breathed or hummed, but the window knew, pulling him under with its rhythm, its pulse a chain that owned his every shudder. The shadow wasn't separate, it was him. The room, the glow, its form stark against the glass, tall, thin, faceless, mirroring his every breath with no delay, its outline a glitch that consumed the space. It didn't speak, didn't touch, but its presence was a cold abyss, a static weight that crushed his chest. chanting his name beneath the drone. Evan, look at me. The whisper was a scream now, its words a blade that sliced through his mind, his will, his essence. Evan, come closer. He'd tried to resist, covered the window with blankets, smashed the glass with a chair, but the shards glowed brighter, the hum sharper, a pulse that shattered his bones. The shadow stood within him, beside him, around him, through him, its form human yet grotesquely warped, its limbs stretching into spectral threads, its head twitching to fast, its silence a roar that drowned his thoughts. He clawed at his face, desperate for something real, but the hum pulsed beneath his skin, a rhythm that answered only to the glass. Evan, you're here. The apartment trembled, the hum a tempest that shook the void, the whisper a vow. Evan, see me. The glow twisted the air, bending it into a shimmer that pulsed with the rhythm, casting the shadow in a cold, endless dance. Hundreds now, swaying in every corner, their hands brushing his skin, their forms eternal. He stumbled to the window, hands bleeding, nails torn, but it pulls back alive, unyielding, humming his name in a chorus that wouldn't stop. The glass reflected not the world but them, thousands of figures swaying in the dark, their forms mirrored, their whispers a demand. Evan, you're mine. Sleep swallowed him or never left. He stood in the room beyond, the walls slick with shadow, the air thick with drones. The figure stood within him, its hand on his chest, its form flickering, arms too long, head tilting to far, its whisper a command. Evan, come with me. He woke or didn't, the clock frozen, the shadow inside him, its outline merging with his flesh, its cold sinking into his soul. The glow burned brighter, reflecting not him but them, lives he'd never lived, faces he'd never known, each one swaying, whispering his name, pulling him into their abyss. Evan, stay. The house was the hum, the walls breathed it, the floors pulsed it, the air sang it, a drone that wouldn't rest, wouldn't fade, wouldn't release him. He tried to scream, but his voice was theirs, humming their rhythm, whispering their chant. Evan, look at me. The shadow stood over him, within him, its form a mass that pulsed with the glow, its hands brushing his eyes, his throat cold, electric, claiming. The window roared, its light a storm that tore through his core. Evan, you're here. He didn't remember moving, didn't remember breathing, but his reflection did, tilting its head, stepping through him, humming his name in a voice that was theirs. The glow seared into his eyes, a light that didn't illuminate but consumed, its hum a scream that annihilated his mind. The shadow was him, beside him, around him, through him, its form stark, its head twitching, its presence a cold that devoured his nerves. The room trembled, the whisper a hurricane. Evan, you're mine. He saw them, not reflections, but souls, endless loops of despair. Thomas Wren staring at the glass, a woman reaching into nothing, shadows swaying in a room that wasn't there. Each one whispered his name, a plea, a claim, a curse pulling him into their eternity. The apartment plunged into a darkness that wasn't absence but presence, a void that pulsed with the hum, its edges brushing his skin, its weight erasing his spirit. He tried to run, but his legs were there, swaying to the rhythm, rooted by a pulse that wasn't his. The glow burned through his eyes, and he saw not himself but them, his form flickering, breaking, dissolving into the glass. His breath theirs, his voice theirs, his self theirs. The shadow's hand brushed his face, cold, relentless, alive, the hum roaring, the whisper a noose. Evan, come with me. Sleep was them or he was them. He stood in the void, the figures his mirror, their hands on his wrists, his neck, their rhythm his tune. The hum roared from his throat, his lungs, his soul, a drone that consumed him, rewrote him, owned him. He woke or didn't, the clock dead, the shadow him, its form a glitch in his flesh, its whisper a chant he couldn't stop. Evan, you're mine. The glow pulsed one final time, the room beyond a void that swallowed his essence, the figures watching, waiting, claiming a gaze he couldn't escape, a hum he couldn't silence. The room stilled, the hum a low thread, the shadow swaying, watching, waiting. He didn't know if he stood or sank, didn't know if he lived or hummed, but the window knew, threading his name through the drone, stitching him into its abyss. The shadow was him, over him, around him, through him, its hands eternal, cold, electric, alive, its rhythm a pulse he couldn't break. The apartment was theirs, the windows, the glows, the hums, and he was theirs, a flicker in the glass, a whisper in the dark, a soul staring back from a gaze that wouldn't fade. Days passed or didn't. The apartment stood empty, dust settling on the floor, the walls silent but alive. A friend knocked, the door creaking open to stillness. The window glowed faintly, its glass reflecting not the alley, but that room dim, endless, wrong. A note lay in the dust, scrawled in Evan's hand. I see now. The hum pulsed once, soft and low, a whisper on the air, you're here. Then faded, leaving only the glass still, unmarred, waiting. The friend peered closer, curious, and the window flickered. A shadow stood within, tilting its head, whispering his name. Come closer. The glow pulsed. The hum began anew, threading through the silence, tugging at the air. The shadow swayed, its form sharp, its gaze unblinking, its whisper a promise. Look at me. The cycle turned, the window watching, the hum reaching, the glass a trap for another soul to claim, another life to fade into its endless vigil, a gaze that wouldn't rest, a whisper that wouldn't end. Evan was gone, not gone, but there's trapped in the glass, a hum in the glow, a shadow staring back. The apartment settled, the window dimmed, but the hum lingered, a thread in the silence, searching for its next watcher. The shadow remained, unseen but alive, its rhythm a call for someone new to look, to stay, to become a window that watched forever.